Welcome to the Agile Wire, where professional Scrum trainers Jeff Boobles and Jeff Molesky discuss Agile topics. Now, here are your hosts, Jeff Boobles and Jeff Molesky.
And we are recording. All right, Mr. Boobles, kick us off, man.
All right, so this week we have Robin Zander on the podcast. So Robin comes to us from California, and I found out about Robin due to the Responsive Conference. And I'm sure he's going to tell us more about this, but then I found this responsive.org and this whole website and this manifesto, and it seems so close to what we talk about all the time in the Agile community that I thought we should bring Robin on and we should have a conversation about that. So Robin, maybe you can just back us up a second, and maybe before we even get into that, you can just introduce yourself and give people a little background about yourself.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you, Jeff and Jeff, Boobles and Molesky for having me here. I'm so pleased to be on today. I've come to think of myself as a perpetual founder who is primarily motivated by things that I don't know how to do yet. So I do crazy things even by a landscape of people who do crazy things like open up a restaurant, cafe, and event space in San Francisco in 2016 on 3 weeks' notice with no restaurant experience, and then sell it on Craigslist 3 years later. Or, start a business conference about the future of work, knowing nothing about business conferences and very little about the future of work. These days, my day job, my business is Zander Media, sort of a full service media digital agency based out of San Francisco and Austin, primarily specializing in explainer videos, but we do a lot more than that too. But the heart of it for me is building great places to work, building environments where people can come fully alive. And I think that drive for me comes because I've spent so many years of my life and so many iterations of my career working in environments that are generally the opposite of that, right? Generally not well served for the people who work within them. I grew up in a small family business. My dad ran an environmental consulting firm throughout my childhood and teenage years. And my dad is an artist, right? Bless him, he's now retired, but he loved the work of it. He hated the management of it. And so when I was, very briefly at odd intervals, his employee, I didn't get treated great, right? He didn't want employees. He didn't want to build a company. He wanted to be the person doing the work, but there was more work for just one person to do. And I mean, I started actually working long before working at my dad's business. I started a pumpkin patch when I was 6, right? And hired the local neighborhood kids to help me market the pumpkin patch. And on and on and on. I try to count and I get lost in the 50s, but I've worked in more than 50 different gigs over the last 15 years.
And how many of those have you started, or businesses that you've worked for somebody, or versus ones?
It's great, yeah. So those are combined. I haven't actually tried to count, but certainly more than 10 of those are things that I've started, and many of them have failed, many of them never took off, and then some some where I'm the employee. But so back to your question about responsive and sort of what is it and how I got involved. Responsive.org is a movement. It's a manifesto. It's sort of a stance on the world of work. I think the founders, and I'm not one of the founders of Responsive, but I sort of came in the early days, saw the Agile manifesto and said, we want to make something like this that is not pedagogical, that doesn't say this is the step-by-step process by which every company can become responsive, but rather outlining the problems in the world. And again, this was 2014, 2015. This was pre-COVID pandemic. This was pre some of the stuff we've been seeing in the world in the last couple of years. But we recognize that there is a movement away from hierarchy towards distributed ways of working, right? Away from top-down control and more towards the movement of people enacting change, right? Away from opacity, away from privacy towards transparency. And it's not that there's only one way to do it, right? I am still the CEO of Zander Media, right? But what are the ways that I can create greater transparency that enables people at work to do their best jobs? And so the 6 different founders, this is Adam Pisoni, the co-founder and CTO of Yammer, Alexis Gonzalez Black, the woman responsible for rolling out Holacracy at Zappos, Erin Dignan, the author of Brave New Work and founder of The Ready, right? These sort of like giants in the field of org design and thinking about the future of work wrote this manifesto. And I came into the conversation in 2015. I met a couple of them and said, like, this is amazing. This so resonates, the language which folks can read. It's responsive.org is the URL. It sat well with me, right? Kind of like Boobles, what you said, right? Of like, oh, there's language here, but there's so much more to it. And it fits with my experience as an employee and as a perpetual founder, where the way we've worked historically, the way I grew up thinking about work is broken. What do we do now? And here, some people had put language together, and I said, great, what can I do to help? We ended up running, long story short, a free unconference, right? Agenda set by the people on the day of in early February 2016. And I was expecting 20 or 30 people to show up, right? Like it's an unconference. I didn't have very many expectations. I'd never run an event of sort of about the future of work before. And it was for the people. It was for whoever showed up, and I wanted to be there to learn. And I remember there was a moment where the global head of people at Accenture, first of all, showed up. So holy shit, right? I'm like, okay, well, right, interesting. And then there's a Holacratic run, or formerly Holacratic run, self-managed catering company and sort of food service business called Three Stone Hearth, local to the Bay Area in Oakland. It's been around 20 years. They went through a whole Holacratic exploration. Now they're owned by the employees, self-managed. I don't know how many of the original founders are still a part of the business, but some baristas from Three Stone Hearth showed up with deep expertise on holacracy as the people serving customers in a holacratic business, right? And holacracy, I don't know if the audience knows or not, right? But a form of self-management. And if you haven't, you should definitely have Brian on talking about holacracy. But they started talking about employee compensation strategy, right? And so you've got this barista who's earning for tips with the global head of people at a like publicly traded, I assume they were publicly traded at the time, global company, just going at it in like the best possible way, but like not casually. And that room just blew up. And pretty soon there were, 10 people in it, 50 people in it. And they just like took that room over for the rest of the day, talking about how to negotiate and how to discuss and how publicly transparent should employee compensation strategy be. And I looked at that room and I looked at the day. I don't know if I said there were probably 175 people there when we were expecting 20 in the unconference for the day. And I said, oh, there's movement here, right? In 2016, there's something here. So I went back to the founders of Responsive Org and said, hey, I think we can do something with this. Do I have your blessing to like run a conference, to do more, to see what I can do with this? And ended up running the very first Responsive conference in 2016.
Awesome. And then how did it grow? I know you've told me this story, but the talk, the one about
totally
Richard Sheridan.
I mean,
no, sorry, it was who it was
Tony Hsieh and
Katie
right.
Shea, that's who it was that came.
So yeah, I mean for background, right? Like I'm a self-taught circus performer and acrobat, right? Like I started studying dance and acrobatics in my early 20s and then went on to perform on stage. But I'd never been to a business conference in 2016, right? Like, or if I had, I hadn't been to very many, and I certainly didn't know how to curate one. And so I just asked everybody I knew, but mostly I said, what is the kind of learning environment that I'm interested in being a part of? Right. And I'm not interested in sitting and listening to people on stage talk at me about the top 10 ways to do X, Y, and Z. Right. What I'm interested in is something that's highly interactive, highly engaging. And I also had no budget. So I went looking for venues in the Bay Area, and I found the Children's Science Museum, the Lawrence Hall of Science in the Berkeley Hills, which has like stomp rocket exhibits and like, a full lunar model hanging from the ceiling and all of these exhibits. And it was cheap and it was beautiful. And it has these stunning views of the entire Bay Area. And so that was the venue that I chose. And then the curation essentially just kind of fell in around that. And then to your point, Jeff, we had an amazing array of speakers. I just hustled. I just asked every single person I knew and every person I met, like, who should I be talking to? I ended up booking myself, 6.5 days a week for 15-minute calls back to back, like 12 hours a day for 6 months, and ended up like having some real amazing powerhouses on stage leading workshops. So big shout out to Willie Jackson, who's now at the Ready Set talking about sort of diversity, equity, inclusion in 2016. We had Chris Fussell, the co-author of Team of Teams, come and present. We had Adam Pisoni, of course, as one of the co-founders of Responsive, and Aaron Dignan. I think Alexis was there that first year too. And then, I mean, one of the stories that I like to tell is, and again, it's just my own naivete as an event producer, right? I'm up until 2 a.m. the night before, like taping down XLR cables with my small volunteer team, right? Like I am hustling my ass off. And then I'm running down to introduce Adam Pisoni, who's our first keynote of the day at 9 or 10 in the morning on day one of the 2-day conference. And I get a call from my volunteer who's at the door and said, "There's this guy named Tony who's standing here, and he doesn't have a ticket, but he's with a group. Like, I think you should come up." I'm like, I'm about to introduce our speaker, so I run up to the top floor where the entrance is, and there is Tony Hsieh of Zappos fame, right? Right? Who's now so sadly deceased, but like who built Zappos and who sort of spearheaded Zappos culture, standing at the entrance, being like, "I thought I'd come to your conference," right? Like no ticket. Some of his entourage and Tony, bless him, always. I've never saw Tony alone. He became a friend, and we were really blessed to run Responsive 2019 at Zappos at their HQ. But he walked in and was just like, I thought I'd come and hang out at your conference for 2 days. At the very end of the 2 days, he kind of like summoned me up to the nosebleeds where he and his entourage were sitting and was like, "You did a good job. You should come to my conference." And they were putting on Life is Beautiful, like their music festival in Vegas, the next weekend. And I don't go to music festivals. It's just not my scene. But like, okay, right? Like this naive, I don't know how old I was then, mid-20s, right? Like I'm apparently, the billionaire in Vegas is just inviting me to Vegas. So I guess I'm going to go next weekend. But right, the real point there of like people came out of the woodwork, right? Both people who have notoriety and also kind of in some ways more importantly to me, I should say, just because it's insane when I think back to it. I had opened my restaurant in April, and the restaurant catered the conference, which was across town. It was like 30 miles away, right? We were brick and mortar serving like avocado toast and beer, and the cafe catered the 300-person conference 30 miles away, 3 months after opening the restaurant, never having run a business conference before. So again, when I say I do crazy things, but like, yeah, people came out of the woodwork because those topics were so, right, people were hungry for them and still are, even more so now.
So
There's a lot to fucking unpack there, but like, and Jeff, I don't know where you want to go. So I always hesitate stepping on top of you, but one of the first things that you were saying inside of there that I was really interested about was that building of a culture. And I'm really right now I'm at Acorns. We're very mission driven, probably the most mission driven organization I've ever worked for. With benevolence and courage, we look after the financial best interests of the up and coming. Right, like that's our mission statement. At the beginning of every meeting, well, I shouldn't say every meeting, every larger meeting, the MBRs, the monthly business reviews, the staff meetings, we always start out with that. It's at the beginning of every one of our slide decks, regardless of the meeting you go into. And now it's at the beginning of our narratives because we're taking on narrative culture. But and so our CEO Noah talks quite a bit about that. In fact, I think he was just out at some conference in Vegas talking about how mission drives a good culture. But what I wanted to really kind of pick your brain about is like your passion is for building great organizations. Cool, but it doesn't feel like building a great organization is a one man, one woman, one person type of job, right? It makes me think back to whatever the quote is: the right people on the bus, the right people off the bus, and the right people in the right seats, right? Like gross oversimplification of it, but also not wrong, right? So I'd love to just dig a little bit deeper there. Like, what does that mean to you, building a right culture? How do you do it? Who's responsible for it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's fun. One of the questions I got so often in the early days of Responsive, so years 1 and 2 primarily, were middle managers of Fortune 100 companies. So like the PepsiCos of the world, but right, somebody who's in the mid tiers of PepsiCo has worked there for 15 years and is like just whatever the term is, responsive, agile, teal, holocratic, right? They want to build an organization of the future within this giant conglomerate. And they would come to me at the end of the conference and say, like, I want to make this change, but my manager's not on board. Or I want to make this change, but how do I persuade the C-suite? And I didn't, again, the first couple of years, like I was the organizer. I still don't have all the answers, right? But definitely then I just remember sort of my helpless feelings. And then I think it was year 3 that somebody asked me that question. And I kind of just had an inspiration and I was like, oh, you can't, right? Somebody who is in the middle of a power structure that is not on board to create that kind of dramatic change can't create that change, right? Zander Media today can only be as good as I am willing to let it become, right? So what that means for me in my again, building sort of a modern day media agency, from the ground up, right? We're 9 people today, don't know what we'll be a couple of years from now, but right, continuing to grow, is giving the authority to my people while holding the vision for how good can we become, right? And above all, not stomping on, not suppressing the creative drives, the creative directions, right? And it's this tension. I mean, that's the thing about the responsive manifesto that still to this day speaks to me so clearly, is we are all needing to balance the tension between, right? So like in that case, I'm looking at what are the business objectives versus what are the sort of the emotional creative aspirations of my team, and how do I hold those in balance, right? So if a middle manager can't change the trajectory of an organization without the buy-in of their higher ups, right? And eventually I had to start telling people, well, if your higher ups aren't on board, leave. Like that's actually your only option if you really want to create change, right? But I think culture is, it has to come from the top down, or at least in some capacity, right? The leadership of an organization has to believe in that trajectory. And then how do we take the micro steps every single day, right? Culture is not the words splashed on a billboard on the wall, right? It is the incremental day by day of how we make people feel.
So I'll give you a little pushback there. So I think that somebody in a middle management position can make a big difference. I mean, can they make it all? Can they change it completely into Zappos? Probably not, but they can get started and they can show the results. And then they can maybe influence those that can make that decision. So what I always tell middle managers when they ask me that same question is the best thing you can do, any power that you have, give it away. Give it away with the information that you have. So you teach people what you know, teach them how to make better decisions, teach them to be accountable and take ownership for things, coach them up along the way, and then try to put a structure in place that allows them to be innovative and creative, right? Like let them own problems, let them get close to customers, let them do experiments and let some of them fail because they're learning experiences and that's the only way they're going to get better. And so I think that that's not like just say, "Oh, you own it. Go. I'm done. Now I'm the leader." I
Right.
get, but it's like there's a lot of work there to coach somebody up to give them that responsibility and kind of help them through that. And not really in a fake empowerment, but a real empowerment where you're kind of letting them go, but you're there more of in a coaching stance. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what if you were a middle manager and you took that approach where it's like, I'm going to give things away. I'm going to give you information and I'm going to help, make more decision makers in my organization, more people empowered. That's my goal.
Totally. Yeah, the question essentially that I hear there is what are the steps towards, right, creating more empowerment within a power structure of which I'm a part, right? And
Mhm.
exactly what you said is give it away, right? And nurture, right? I think of my me at my best at Zander Media, or me at my best at my old restaurant, my at Robin's Cafe, right, was delegating authority so that, right, like if I was in service to so cafe is so simple, right? I'm sure you've talked about this before, but the typical power hierarchy where the CEO and founders at the top flip it on its head, right? So it's an upside down pyramid where I am in service to my employees such that my employees can provide the very best value to our customers, right? Servant leadership, as it were. And I'm thinking more, right, in the Fortune 100 example where the C-suite is distinctly not on board, right? And trying to persuade the unpersuadable. One of my old professors, Professor B.J. Fogg from Stanford, gave me some of the best and most heartbreaking advice of my life, which is like, don't try to sell people who are already a no, right? That's just a lost cause. And it's true in sales, and it's true in org design. It's true in transformation work of any kind. If someone is a no to creating change, like, you're not going to change them, and it's a waste of your energy to try. But looking for those people who want to go in the direction that you're moving and giving them the tools to do so, 100%.
Mm-hmm. The other option is, even if you're in Fortune 100 companies, if you can somehow create an org within an org, like a lot of times they do like, skunk work projects,
Skunk
different
teams.
things where, they're going to break off into do this little subsidiary or something like that. That's an opportunity to prove like we can work in a different way, and we don't have to do all the things that we did at, the Fortune 100 company when we were part of the big org. So you can do that inside of some of these bigger companies. You just got to find the right structure, I think, to make that change, and then prove it out. And then it can become the North Star, and maybe you're, a positive influence for good because you've proven that it can work here,
Totally. Yeah, that's the model that I've seen most successful by a bunch of, I mentioned Aaron Dignan, big shout out to the Ready, right? Like, their model is starting small, starting with a small team, proving the use case of, let's just say, self-management at wherever, the New York Times, right? And or for example, right, like I had a conversation maybe a year or so ago with the CTO, the former CTO of the New York Times, and right, one of the North Stars of the New York Times, love it or hate it as an institution, right, like politics all entirely aside, the Daily is one of their banner standout performers from the last couple of years, right? The Daily podcast, right? The New York Times going into audio, right? I mean, I remember when that launched, and it was like, what is going on here? But actually, that little hub of, and no knowledge of who's responsible, right? Like, I don't know, what the build out of that process was, but that little incubator that is the Daily as a podcast has been a huge, I think, both, my best guess would be lucrative, and also just like reputational gain for this, age-old institution.
Mm-hmm. So we talked about how maybe to get started, but maybe we should dive into and describe a little bit more about like, what is the future of work and where do we see things going? So, I mean, that's a big question. And I think people, when we say future of work, I think people are talking past each other all the time. Just like we say the word agile, they talk past each other all the time. So
right.
What does that mean to you, Robin? Like the future of work? Paint me a picture.
I don't know how to answer that question anymore. One of the principles, sort of the founding principle behind responsive.org, is that the rate of change is accelerating, right? And then in 2020, 2021, we have seen more acceleration more rapidly than anything that has ever come before. And so, right, like, I can go to, right, what is the future of my work, right? But when I go real abstract and say, what does the future of work look like 50 years from now? I feel like I'm less well equipped to answer that than I have been before. Like, I just can't even guess, right? I mean, the meteoric rise of, let's say, TikTok, right? And I'm old enough now that I remember, right, the rise of Facebook, right, and then the rise of Instagram. And so when we think about the accelerating pace of change, right, things are just going to keep getting faster and faster. How then do we adapt to that, and how then do we build work and sustainability that is met, or that can meet that speed? The other thing that I'll say, and this is a hill that I'll die on, whether it's true long term or not, is the future of work for me is people driven, right? It is people first, right? And there are these dichotomies of like, are you building a business, or are you building an organization that serves the people? And like, are there ways that those are dichotomous, right? That like, actually the best possible business for, short for ROI, for money, cash flow, et cetera, actually, I don't know, pays people less or anything like that. But for me, in my heart of hearts, and for my next 50 years, right, my future of work is in service to the people who are working in the organization, and in service to a broader purpose in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting, and I don't know how far down the rabbit hole we want to go with this, but like, I really feel like you hit the nail on the head, which is just responsiveness or adaptability is the future of work, and needing to constantly strive for that because of the rate of change. And I think there's stupid easy examples of that everywhere. Like right now, okay, there's a supply chain shortage that's fucking with everything right now. But in particular, you can see it in transportation. Okay, well, we're hurting for jobs for truckers right now, but that's a dead end job. That job's going to go away in 5 or 10 years. And I'm not being a jerk when I say that. It is inevitable, right? We're on the verge of self-driving cars. One of the biggest sectors is going to be trucking. We're going to automate that away. Why would we want a human being doing that? Same thing with Amazon warehouse workers. Like, yeah, it's fantastic. Amazon pays a great wage, although you have a robot for a boss that can fire you in an app. Like, not a lot of great stuff there. But that job's going to go away in 5 to 10 years, right? Like, as these businesses and technology continues to innovate and revolutionize different industries, like, it's going to be paramount that organizations are able to respond to that change, not just for the people, but as these systems that all interact with one another, right? The supply chain impacts Amazon, impacts the customer, et cetera. Like, you can't think in isolation anymore. And I really think, I'm kind of rambling here, but you hit the nail on the head. It's just a company's competitive advantage is going to be how well it can respond to the ever increasing amount of change that's going on in the world.
Yeah, I think that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think that it's not just so much it's responding to change, but it's responding in multiple different ways. So I think a lot of times when we talk from like an agile standpoint, we think about like the technology and the delivery, but I'm also talking about like business models. I'm talking about the technology, yes. I'm talking about how people work inside of teams. Like, we might need different sized teams, different people on teams, different skills on teams. We need to learn new skills. Like, we need to be able to figure that out really quickly. There's going to be new problems that emerge that we don't know are going to be there in a month from now, but we're going to have to figure out how to do that and how to reprioritize the work that's out there and figure out how to handle that. And the quicker you can do that, the better. And so I think my thought on the future is that change is going to only accelerate. Like, this is the slowest we'll ever be, is the way it is today. Every day is going to get faster, but at the same point, it should be more people focused. I think we're going to let people be more creative, because I think we are going to automate away a lot of the jobs that are very repetitive. And so I think it gives people an opportunity to bring their best self to work, because they get to do what people like to do. When people like to build things, they like to create things, they like to be a part of teams that solve problems in the world. And I think there's a lot of purpose to that and being close to that. I think people are going to get closer to the work and to the problems because of all the capabilities that we keep building out as we build out the automation, as we build out technology, as we build out all these other things.
Totally.
And you hit on something inside of there, Jeff, that I just want to quick, and I'm really glad that you didn't use the word that often comes to people's mind when they think about automation, is simple. It's not the simple tasks, it's the repetitive tasks. Repetitive regardless of your industry. We're talking lawyers that do repetitive tasks that automation is going away with. We're talking doctors, right? Like, it's not just the simple tasks that we can automate, it's really the repetitive tasks. And that's universal across all industries. And that's why, again, it's beating a dead horse here, but I really feel like it's the ability to quickly and easily respond to change. And then in conjunction, like, freeing up the human capital to be thinking about the complex problems that are sitting out there, the things that aren't repetitive, the things that aren't easy to solve. Like, that's where our knowledge base is going to be transitioning to. And I know, geez, this was a while ago, and shameless plug there, but when we were talking with Joe about this, right, it's basically IT, right? Like, software developers, like, that's maybe right or wrong, but like, that's the job of the future in my mind. Even Medicare, man, like I said, how far down the rabbit hole are we going to go, right? Like, I warned everybody. But like, I feel like we're just in a weird transitionary stage. Like, yeah, medical costs are so expensive, but we're on the verge of just being able to rewrite your DNA with a fucking pill. Like, that's literally what we're doing with RNA stuff at this point in time. So like, what does the future look like when, great, we don't even need doctors to be doing surgeries anymore, except in maybe like extreme cases, but 75-90% are just solvable through a pill or something like that. So like, yeah, I understand like Medicare and medical insurance, like, it's an issue today, but I feel like it's just because we're in a state of transition as these newer technologies are coming out. Anyway, sorry, a little deep there. What else did we want to jump into?
So let's talk about the people doing the work. And so we talked about where the outcome of what they might, produce might look like. But what do you think the future of work looks like? Like, it's an often debated thing, and Robin brought this up beforehand. Like, is it a team, like a sports team, or is it like a family? I don't know, Robin. What are your thoughts? What does the future of work look like for these
Yeah,
teams?
I love this question. And dear friend Caitlin Holloway, the former head of people at Reddit, I think is the first person I heard ask that question. Right? Is a team, is a business, a family, or a sports team? If you have to choose one. And for me, it's a close it's a close toss up because I love my team dearly. Right? Like I really truly love the people I get to work with every day, and it's a sports team, right? Like there are consequences, there is performance, right? um for me, it's a sports team that I hope and plan to continue playing that same sport with for the rest of my life, right? Like it is that long term, but it also took me 15 years to get to the place, right? Having worked in so many different industries where I'm like, no, clearly for me Xander Media is a business that I'm going to be a part of in some way for, right, life extension. I'm going to shoot for at least the next 70 years, right, of like day to day, like grind, hustle, and fun. um the people who work within it, I mean, right, like there's lots of ways to run a business, right? Like there are plenty of businesses that uh not to pick on any specific social network, right? Like truly not in this moment, but I don't like thinking of the people who I'm taking money from as my users, right? Or taking data from or whatever. Like I look at that word and I'm like, yeah, you know who else is users, right? Like people on drugs, right? Like, huh, how do I refer to my clients? How do I refer to the people that we are in service to? Actually, the words of that and the emotions of that really, really matters to me. Right. I don't think that there's people at whatever Snap and TikTok and Facebook who are just saying, oh, our users, right? Like malicious. Like I don't actually believe there's maliciousness there. But I think that how we refer to the people we work with or how we feel about them, right, really, really matters. And in that way, in that idea of servant leadership, I am in service to Xander Media's creative director, Angela, right, who was with me. Like she was an unpaid videography intern at the cafe, right, and at the early days of Responsive. And then when I sold the cafe, I turned around and hired her as our first employee, first time, like first full time employee. That that idea, like I feel indebted to her. I feel responsible for her, and not just financially, but like as a matter of making sure that Xander Media serves her for as long as that makes sense for her in her career and her professional aspirations. Hopefully that's forever, right? But like if Angela 10 years from now goes off and starts something new, like can I help with that? And can Xander Media support her with that? And same with, same with everyone that I work with now, but also in perpetuity. Same with the people I've worked with, at Responsive in the early days. Like I just hold so much sacred by those relationships in the same way that I expect Xander Media not just to deliver incredible, exceptional, spectacular videos to our clients who pay us for those videos, but I actually want the experience of our clients to be superlative, right? Like I want it to be a quality experience because I'm not in it to make a buck, because I'm in it for the long-term relationships, because I'm in it to ultimately, for me, create as much change and as much positivity in the world. Like that's the goal, is creating as much positivity as possible. That's not necessarily the goal. That can't be the goal of a publicly traded company that is responsible for next quarter's reports, right? That's a different game. That's a different project. That has to fundamentally have different outcomes. So the future of work is whatever the organizations that make up the future of work want to make it.
So, kind of taking a step back there, though, um, do you think the differentiator there, when you're saying, or when we're thinking about the sports team versus the family, do you think a big influence there is the private versus public company when you're being accountable to shareholders versus accountable to your people?
I mean, yeah, if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, that's the question of like, is capitalism good? Right. Like, and that's well beyond my pay grade. Right. But there are consequences to the systems that are in place around publicly traded companies. I didn't realize this before entering the media landscape, but all of the big media conglomerates, right? All of the, uh, you know, all of the ad agencies that are responsible for the Super Bowl ads we know and love are owned by media. Most of them, almost all of them, are owned by media conglomerates that are publicly traded companies. So there too, we see the same thing that I was first exposed to in Responsive of like, how much change can a Fortune 100 make if that is going to short term decrease their, next quarter's reports, right? So what stories can we tell or can we not tell if a publicly traded company is, and I hold a modest bit of stock in some of those companies, right? So like, what is the consequence to narrative, to enacting org change at a global level if that truly is, that's good for the world 7, 10, 30 years from now, but it's not good for the company next month, right? Like that's a real tension, and I don't have any answers to that other than I'm not a publicly traded company, and so I can play in perpetuity, right? Like that's my short-term answer for it. And that's also my why is like, cool, how much change can Xander Media create towards the causes that we most believe in?
Yeah. So I'm just kind of regurgitating what I had heard on the news before, but I think it's the problem with Jon Stewart. Like I haven't had a chance to watch it very much, but his show on HBO, he just recently interviewed Jamie Dimon, and like Jeff and I remember you and I talking about this on one of our episodes. I think it was with Gary Hamel way back when the big news was right the Business Roundtable. They're now incorporating social justice and equity and all of that stuff into, and it's not just about shareholder value. And like Jamie Dimon was talking about this stuff to Jon Stewart and saying like, hey, you got to understand we're all about this stuff. And bless him, Jon Stewart just turned it around. Well, yeah, that's fine. But then whenever times come for the government to vote on whether to enact these things, your lobbyists are out there shooting it down. So how can you sit in front of people and say, oh yeah, we're all in on, all these equity things, but then you shoot down every chance you get to actually influence these positive changes in our environment? And so, and I feel like that just goes right to what you were saying, Robin, was like, they are incentivized for these short-term wins. Why would they want to take a hit on shareholder value, et cetera? Because capitalism, and I'm not in the party of like capitalism is bad or anything. I think there's a lot of positivity there. But unchecked capitalism, like there's a reason we have child labor laws in place, okay? Because unchecked capitalism is like, ooh, hell yeah, 12-year-olds, let's send those poor fellows and gals down into the coal mines. That was literally what we used to do,
Yep.
which kind of blows your fucking mind when you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
Yeah, I guess I think a lot of places to go there, Jeff. So I guess when you were first talking about it, I'm like, well, if I'm, some big company, I might lobby against control. Like I just don't want you to control. I might agree with whatever the law is, but I just don't want anyone to tell me I have to do it. Because then I can't change or tweak things. I now have government controlling me on this. So I can see maybe some lobbying against just control in general from a capitalist society. But what I think we can do that we don't do enough of is, this is just a quote from Gary Hamel, is the problem with capitalism isn't capitalism itself, is that we don't have enough capitalists. Like we need everybody to be a capitalist. And so we need more ownership, I think, and more upside. Like you see this in a lot of companies that are thriving right now. Like Amazon, for example, is one of them. They do modest salaries, but then huge stock options. And so if you've been there for a while, you get these great options. The company keeps doing well. You keep doing very well. And you're going to wind up in the long run a lot better off than somebody who jumps jobs, every couple of years, because you won't have those stock options. And you might get the instantaneous, returns because you have this high salary, but you won't. But the long term, for the people that stuck it out for this company and gone through the growth that they've gone through, are going to have more upside. And I think that that's a positive thing. Like so I have a similar manifesto, Robin, and I think that was one of the things that brought me to looking at yours and being like, wow, there are so many similarities. And the last one of mine is ownership, favoring shared risk and reward over exclusive risk and reward. And it just means distributing that risk and reward throughout the organization. Because I think when you do that, everybody has buy-in. Everybody wants to be successful. It's like a sports team. And we all can be like a family, but at the same point, if we're not delivering or somebody's like not carrying the weight, like we have to make a conscious, are we okay with that as a team? Are we going to carry that person? Or are we like, we could do better, if we didn't have that one person? And I think that you kind of bring it back to the culture that you bring up, and you might have teams that can handle that conversation. Right now, we put it on one leader, and they're making those decisions a lot of times with incomplete data, and I think that's the problem.
Totally. Yeah. Shared risk and reward. Strongly
Yes.
agree.
Yeah. Yep.
So how, if you don't mind, I want to double tap on that real quick. Like how do you handle that shared risk, shared reward inside of Zander Media, for instance, or any of the other organizations that you've been part of?
Totally. Yeah. So with responsive, just speaking very tactically, I've offered everyone that has been a part of organizing responsive a piece of the equity, right? Like, would you prefer to receive cash or to receive equity in the organization of the success of this year's conference? Right. And that's what we're moving towards as well with Xander Media, is sort of, a share in the upside that grows based on the longevity of somebody with the organization.
Mm.
Right. Because I look at, being based sort of loosely in Silicon Valley in the extended Bay Area, right? The average life expectancy of, let's just say, a software engineer at a Silicon Valley company is what, like 17 months shorter now, I'm sure, right? With the ways things are changing. I want to work with the same people for 10, 15, 25 years, right? Like, and for that to continue to grow. And so the way to incentivize that is by, first of all, first and foremost, simplest, being human with people, having conversations with people, knowing that life circumstances change and that the business can actually adjust to serve the needs of those people over time. So that's the number 1, 2, and 3 things that I do. But then when it comes to finances, yeah, I'm very much in conversation with my small team right now of like, what are the things that we can be doing to serve financial interests as well, and to distribute, right? Like, the risk rests with me, right? Xander Media, it bears my name. Like, it's going to be my company forever, right? Like, I'm never going to sell it, for example, right? I started it just, on the back of some modest savings from the cafe, right? So yeah, like, there is a substantial portion of risk, and an equivalent reward, right? But Angela, as the first hire, right? Like, what can we do long term to support her? Like, that's a question that I think of regularly. And I don't have all the answers to that, right? Like, we're not of a size yet where it makes sense to get the lawyers involved to like draft those legal agreements. But that's the trajectory that I see, and that's the kind of business that I want to build.
A thing I'll throw out there for people, if they're like, well, how do I do this? And is it money for everybody? Is, I would say, ask your people. I mean, just ask them, what do you want? Like, what would motivate you? Some people it's money. Some people it's time off. Some people it's, I'd rather just work 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week. It's different for every single person. And I think just need to figure that out. Maybe some people just want to be done by 3:00 every day so that they can go coach their kids' sports, whatever the thing might be. And they'll work really hard for you up to 3:00, but they need that time. That's really important to them. And so figure that out. Like, I think that's what ownership is like giving people what they want, as long as they have outcomes that they're hitting, and you just, you even those things up.
Yeah.
Okay. So one thing we haven't talked about yet that I think is important yet to be responsive as an organization is skills. And I think some people, and this is individual skills. So I don't know that you can be a responsive organization if people aren't continuously learning. This has to start at the individual level. It can work at the team level, and then it has to go, up to the org. Like, everybody has to be learning at all levels, or it just doesn't work. Like, your skills are gonna, tarnish. They're going to get old. We're going to automate repetitive things. There's going to be new technologies. Like, there's always something that we need to be learning. And so I think being a responsive org does take a certain type of mindset that we need to always be learning. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm just a yes.
Yeah.
100%. They're done. Right. I'm like, yeah, you said it.
Yeah.
For me, that's a given, right? Like, I didn't even recognize, sort of, for most of my career to date, what a blessing it is that I am a perpetual learner. Actually, one of the things that I'll just kind of like throw a little curveball. I have to, without slowing myself down, moderate my own rapidity to not overwhelm my team. Right. And I don't mean to be that employee on a resume being like, what's your fault? Oh, I work too hard. Like, that's not the thing. It's that, right? Like, anyone who's ever opened a restaurant, I opened a restaurant on 3 weeks notice with zero experience in the city and county of San Francisco. Like, it's insane by any metric, right? Um, I started a media company with zero knowledge about video production, agency structure, right? Anything like that. I turned to Angela and said, I think we should sell video. I think we should sell what we're doing together, right? So for me, I do that. And then it's a matter actually of working with each member of my team to say, what are the directions that each of these people want to learn in, the pace that they learn, and the context that is going to support them becoming the best version of themselves in that domain, right? So I'm apparently picking on Angela. She'll doubtless see this, right? But I gave her the title of creative director, not knowing. I didn't Google what is a creative director. It just felt like intuitively the right decision, right? That's literally how quickly I can move sometimes, and to a fault, right? Like, it is not only and exclusively a net good, right? Then we sat down and said, wait a minute, what is a creative director? Is that actually what you want to do? Right. And I'll never forget, it was, I made her business cards, right? Old school business cards in for 2019 responsive conference. And they said, Angela Soria, creative director. And then we sat down a couple weeks later and was like, well, is that actually the title you want? What do you want to grow into? And bless her, she's been growing into this role of creative director, figuring out what it means, recognizing, oh, right, like, there are a lot of people in the world who hold this title who actually know what it means, so let's go figure out what it means and support her growth in that direction, right? But that's very different than uh telling someone they need to become X, Y, and Z, or right, right, for me, I can grow as quickly as I want. I can go in whatever direction I want to. But if my goal is forever to build an organization that serves the needs of the people, how to grow in a direction that is actually supportive of the development of each of those people, which again comes back to talking to people, requires that I know who those people are and what their personal and professional aspirations are.
So I'm curious to get your thoughts on this topic, and I'm certain it's going to be something like an "it depends," but in line with what we were just talking about, the skills, the continuous growth of individuals. Um, we had an all hands yesterday at Acorns, and one of the engineers had raised their hand. They were talking about recruiting, and like, we're growing gangbusters right now. It's a fantastic time. We're in the process of going public, so a lot of hoopla there. But she raised her hand, had a lot of courage, and said, we're talking about recruiting, we're talking about bringing people in here, but there's been numerous times where we've been going through the interview process. We think this candidate has a lot of potential. They've got that learning mindset, but we don't have the time right now. We're going gangbusters. We need people that are going to hit the ground running. And I feel like that's always a tough business decision. And I think it's a legitimate one from both sides. Like, do you need somebody to be able to hit the ground running? Is there and probably there is a short-term advantage of that, but you got to balance the counterpoint of the long-term advantage of having an employee with the right mindset, back to right people on the bus, right? That is going to see gaps and fill those gaps, regardless of what those gaps might be. And so I kind of want to pick your brain, being a business leader. Like, how do you weigh that stuff? How does that come into play when you're looking at growing your organization?
I think a lot in physical metaphor, right? Being an acrobat, being sort of a perpetual movement practitioner, right? So one of my campaigns, one of my long-term goals is a 60-second single arm, one arm handstand, right? I practice handstands every day. If you want to follow, you can see
Oh yeah,
along
me too.
on
Me too.
Instagram.
This is how we get up in the morning.
But a one arm handstand is, I don't know, a couple of years away of an hour of daily, like 7 days a week practice for me, right? Um, when I think about my movement trajectory, I weigh what, 140, 145. I could put on 20 pounds of muscle, could take steroids and put on 20 pounds of muscle in a couple of weeks, right? Like, I could actually bulk up, right, more healthily, right? Like, I don't know, in a couple of months. Like, I put on muscle quick. And if I were to put on 20 pounds of muscle in any short period of time, my one arm handstands or two arm handstands or any kind of subtlety of movement that I do would go all to shit. Like, I just would not be the movement practitioner that I was if I just walked around with 20 pounds of muscle strapped to my chest. So it's growth is that same way, right? Like, what are you choosing to prioritize? if Zander Media doubled in size tomorrow, the culture that we had would be washed over by the number of new people, no matter how great they are. Right. But there are concrete business needs. You're, on the path to going public. Congratulations. That is a strong business case for prioritizing business even over people. Right. Like that's just how that game is played. And so again, it's really what are the needs of the people? What are the needs of the organization? And how do you balance those? Again, it's those tensions, right? It's like there's no one size fits all. For Zander Media, I'm blessed to be able to grow organically, right? Everyone on the team is bought into like, okay, we want to become a really rock star small agency. What are the steps to become that? But also, is that 3 months from now or 3 years from now? That's a question for the Zander Media team, right? That is a question that we get to explore because the thing that I don't want and that my team doesn't want is to strap, 40 pounds of muscle on a really lithe, really flexible, really incredible place to work that all of a sudden actually makes us less good at doing what we do, right? Because that results the change of everyone leaving work in 2021 is no surprise to me, right? And is no surprise to anyone who's been paying attention to how workers are treated, right? Of course, people are dissatisfied, recognizing that they have choices elsewhere and leaving, right? So if I want to, or if we want to build great places to work, it's a matter of actually prioritizing or at least recognizing that when we're making choices that don't prioritize people, doing that intentionally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think we've said this phrase a lot on this podcast, but when you say yes to something, you're also saying no to something else. So when you're saying yes to that 20 pounds of muscle, you're saying no to being nimble and being able to do a lot of other things inside of your organization. So I guess you have to life's full of trade-offs. Pick which, you got to pick which one's more important at that time based off the situation. And there might be a time and place for each decision, but just know what, make that conscious decision, I think would be the advice that I would give our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Robin, this has been a great conversation. Thank you for joining us. At this time, is there anything you want to plug to our listeners or promote to them?
No, keep doing the work, right? Show up every day. Keep doing the work, right? Right. Yeah, I love it when you say yes to something, you say no to something else. So if you're listening to Jeff and me today, like, thank you. You're on that path. Keep doing the work, right? Be nice to people. Ask them questions. That's what the future of work is for me.
Thank you for listening to the Agile Wire. We are consistently inspecting and adapting ourselves. We would appreciate feedback at feedback@theagilewire.com or on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Play Store. See you next time.